Hi, welcome back. Thank you for joining me again. Today I'm going to be reading chapters 2 and 3 of my memoir, B's Pickled Juice. But before we jump into that, I wanted to share with you this t-shirt that I designed. It's really cool. The eyes on the face really bring out my tits. But it's for sale. It's available on my Etsy store. The storefront is B's Pickled Art. So if you search for it, you should be able to find it. The B's Pickled Art is all one word, so if that makes it easier to find, that might help. Anyway, let's jump into chapter 2, the title of which is Just Because I'm Paranoid Doesn't Mean They're Not Out to Get Me. I had been driving for my friend's taxi company, Napoleon Taxi, Richmond's most highly acclaimed and most popular cab service, for about 3 years when Uber started operating in Richmond. Pretty much as soon as Uber went live, our clientele went from being very diverse, serving all demographics from all parts of the city, to serving almost exclusively the elderly, the sick, and the poor from hospitals, nursing homes, and government housing. I was grateful to still have the business. I don't mean to denigrate those people, but my income shrank significantly because those three demographics didn't typically tip their drivers, and I didn't really want to go out of my way to change how I played the game. Still, I stuck with the job. Napoleon had always been good to me. My hours were flexible, and I was still able to make my rent, so I didn't want to go through the trouble of being a new guy somewhere else. Cab driving was always a crazy job. But in the months leading up to Uber's launch in Richmond, and all of the time after Uber started operating, driving the cab became even crazier. My stress levels started becoming difficult to manage. I started getting a lot of fares where I felt like people were deliberately fucking with me, or fares that I felt like they were scripted for the sake of some kind of production. We had dash cams in all of the cabs. The cameras would record high-quality audio and video of everything going on inside and outside of the cab, as long as the engine was running. Having a camera pointed at my face for 12 hours a day, 4, sometimes 5 days a week, took its toll on my psychological well-being. I was never sure if the camera's feeds were monitored remotely, or if someone was pulling the memory cards after each shift to watch me interact with my customers. I wasn't sure if someone was watching me sing along to my favorite music during the times I was driving alone for the sole purpose of making fun of me. I worried about these things a lot, but for the most part I kept these worries to myself for fear of people thinking I was crazy. I had several working theories about what was being done with my cab footage. The cameras were there for the safety of the drivers and the passengers. They saved my ass on more than one occasion, so I was ambivalent about the dash cams to say the least. I was glad that they were there, but I hated the fact that everything I did and said was documented with video evidence. Not that I was doing anything illegal or immoral, but the fact that I couldn't get away with anything if I wanted to bothered the hell out of me. Mostly, I treated the camera as a silent observer of everything I did, who could report anything and everything that went on inside my cab. I would talk to it as though someone were watching me through it at all times. Sometimes I was sure that the dispatchers could see me in real time. I was sure that they would deliberately send me on jobs that made me fear for my safety, all because I was sure that they enjoyed watching me squirm. I do admit that the dispatchers never said anything to make me think this, but I just couldn't fathom why else they would send me on certain jobs. Orders were given to drivers based on the driver's locations relative to the customer's pickup locations. So, for example, when I was pulled from one side of our service map, let's say Shockoe Bottom, to the other, Short Pump, to run a $5 fare for an abusive troll of a person, it made me suspicious as to why I was chosen to drive 20 minutes, expending however much gas it took me to get there, to pick up a fare that wasn't worth the time and effort. If I were to pay $3.75 in tolls and drive 10 miles in a Crown Vic to pick up a fare that only paid $5.50, then I would actually end up losing several dollars for the privilege of driving that fare. As a cab driver, that sort of thing is expected to happen sometimes, and it sucks. But when it would happen several times in a night, it was difficult not to assume that someone was doing it to me out of spite or for sadistic pleasure. The dispatch software was supposed to prevent that sort of thing from happening, but it happened all the time. I rarely second-guessed the dispatchers because I worried that they would fuck with me harder if I were to complain. So, instead, Whenever this sort of thing would happen, I would throw a childish temper tantrum for the camera. I would scream like a madman and pound the dash, or I would punch the side of my head because I was literally exploding with rage. It seemed that if I were ever to complain about a problem that I was having, that problem would suddenly become more pervasive and more troublesome. Throwing a tantrum was literally the only thing I could do that wouldn't result in someone making my life more difficult. It wasn't like my complaints backfired on me some of the time. Every single time I complained about something, that something would get worse. I couldn't explain why, but I just about went mad trying to figure it out. I would usually park my cab in the Walgreens parking lot at the end of Carytown on Elwood Avenue when I was waiting for jobs to be dispatched to me. One night, in the fall of 2014, I was parked in that lot talking with another driver when I received an order to pick up a woman at a bar called Buddy's. At the time, Buddy's was located on Robinson Street, which was about a 3-minute drive away. When I arrived to pick up my customer, I called her to inform her that her cab was outside and waiting. She hung up on me without saying a word. I heaved an impatient sigh, gritted my teeth, and began to write down the trip information on my manifest. After being asked several times by people who hadn't called for me if I could take them somewhere, and having to decline each one, I was about to cancel the order when suddenly a middle-aged white couple exploded from the bar's entrance, and they were bickering very loudly. The woman was a dark-haired, sour-faced woman who was wearing a black beret, thick black-rimmed glasses, and a dark green pea coat. She opened the rear passenger side door and asked me if I was there for her. She was your quintessential Karen, though that term had not yet been invented. I asked if she was going to the address that was listed on my order, a townhouse on Hanover that was about 10 blocks away in the museum district. She was going to a house near a building in which I used to live, so I was familiar with the destination. She confirmed with me that she was indeed my intended passenger and sat down and slammed the door. The man she was with, however, did not get in. He was scrawny, balding, and had the disposition of a man with a victim complex over his own poor decision-making, or a guy who fancied himself to be a good person but who never got his way. Maybe I assumed a lot about him at a glance, but I'm seldom wrong about these sorts of things. The woman rolled down her window halfway, and she argued with him for a few more minutes about whether he would ride home with her. I was still stopped in the middle of Robinson Street with my hazard lights blinking, so having started to lose my patience, I politely urged them to figure out what they wanted to do, so I could stop blocking traffic. The woman rolled up her window, nearly crushing her companion's hand, and told me to just go. Before I put the car into drive, I asked the woman if she had a preferred route, to which she belligerently barked, "You're the driver, why the fuck are you asking me?" "Ma'am, I would just like to get you home. It's protocol that I ask which way you'd like me to go." "Just fucking go," she said lackadaisically as her companion continued to lean against the car with his palm on the window. "Can you get your husband to stop leaning on the cab so I can get out of here without hurting anyone?" "He's not my husband. Just go. Fuck him." "Ma'am, I can't drive until he gets off the car," I said while obviously forcing a calm demeanor. She rolled down the window again. "Get off the fucking car. Go home, you fucking idiot." Then rolled the window back up and continued. "Now drive." The man pushed himself off the car, stumbled backward, and yelled, "What about the other cabs you called? And the Uber?" Irritated from learning that my passenger was the detestable kind of slug who orders several cabs at once and takes whichever one shows up first, I angrily slammed the transmission lever into drive and took off. I was careful to not let my tires squeal, despite my intense feelings about the couple. I drove north on Robinson until I got to Park Avenue, where I turned left. I was planning on taking Park to Shepherd, then Shepherd to Hanover, turning right on Hanover and driving her the few remaining blocks to her house. I think it was on the 3400 block. The point of those useless-to-you directions is that I knew how to get to her destination off the top of my head. "Where the hell are you going?" she demanded as we approached the intersection of Park and North Boulevard, which is now called Arthur Ashe Boulevard. "I'm taking you home," I said, and read the address back to her. "This is the most direct route I know how to get you there." "This isn't the way I would have gone. I would have cut through the museum parking lot to cut over to Hanover," she snarled. "Well, ma'am, I asked you if there was a way you wanted to go, and you ignored me. It's illegal for me to cut through the VMFA parking lot anyway, so the point is moot. Moot? What the fuck do you mean it's moot? You know, this wouldn't be an issue if you were a Uber. What's wrong with you anyway? Why don't you just drive for Uber? Wouldn't you make more money? You wouldn't have to drive this smelly old cab, she said condescendingly while seemingly deliberately mispronouncing the word Uber every time she said it. My cab wasn't even very old. I can't drive for Uber because my car is more than 10 years old, and even if I had a newer car, I sure as hell wouldn't want to be driving drunks around in it, I replied calmly and with thinly veiled contempt. Hey, calm down, I was just asking. There's no need to raise your voice at me, she exclaimed as if I had yelled at her. You're acting crazy. Sorry, ma'am, but I didn't raise my voice. You're yelling at me. Why are you yelling at me? You're insane. What's your name? I'm going to report you to the owner of your company. I know him personally. I consider him a friend, so you're about as good as fired. Ma'am, if you're going to be disrespectful, I'm going to have to let you out here, and you can figure out how to get the rest of the way there. Maybe one of those other cabs you called will find you. I'm not obligated to drive you anywhere, I said as I slowed down and started to pull to the right side of the road. I have never in all of my life been talked to this way. What is your fucking name? You are so done. You are so fired, you crazy piece of shit, she screamed at me as I began driving towards her house again. My name's Joe, I lied. Well, Joe, what's your last name? I'm calling your boss right now, she bluffed as she put her phone to her ear, and I continued to drive. I'm on hold now. You're going to be so sorry you messed with me. I ignored her, and by this point we were pulling up outside of her house. That'll be $8.50. Are you going to be paying cash or card? She pulled out her wallet while still cradling the phone on her shoulder. The guy who was with her at Buddy's suddenly walked up and leaned on my half-open driver's side window to ask us what took us so long. The woman handed me $12 in cash and told the guy to shut up and go inside. The man remained at my window, hanging onto the door so he wouldn't fall over. The woman got out of the car, and her friend stood up to ask her, "Should I kick his ass? What's the matter?" I rolled my eyes so hard that if I wasn't strapped in, I may have involuntarily cartwheeled. The woman came around to my side of the car, grabbed the guy's arm, and they both stumbled off in the opposite direction of the house, which they said was their destination. Thanks, don't ever call us again, I yelled as I wrote down the fare information on my manifest and closed out the order on my tablet. Once I was finished writing down the trip information, I called my dispatcher and described the entire ordeal. I suggested blacklisting the phone number from which the order came. This was the first encounter I had where I seriously started considering the idea that Uber was hiring people to fuck with local taxi drivers. The thought had crossed my mind before this incident, but this incident nearly sealed the deal for me. I can't be sure why they would do such a thing, but I assumed it was so that taxi drivers would get fed up with all this bullshit and start driving for Uber full-time. At the time that this was happening, there were already rumors and news reports about shady practices being used by Uber against their competitors. My company was planning to release an app that worked similarly to Uber, but strictly for digitally hailing taxis. I wonder if Uber got wind of Napoleon's upcoming app and see it as a threat that needs to be nipped in the bud. If Uber isn't hiring people to fuck it with drivers, then someone is conspiring to fuck with me, at the very least. Later that night, I received an order to pick up someone at a bar called Metro. It was another bar on Robinson Street, very close to the bar from which I had picked up the devil woman who couldn't say Uber properly. When I arrived outside of Metro, I pulled as close to the curb as I could, put the car in park, and turned on my hazard lights. I called the number listed on my tablet. A friendly-sounding man answered the phone and told me he would be right out. In less than a minute, a man got into the back seat of my cab and commanded me to go to Carey Street Cafe, which was only about 6 blocks away. The putrid smell of bile, sweat, and cheap whiskey filled the cab the moment he sat down. I choked a little as I asked if he was the man with whom I had just gotten off the phone. "Yeah, sure, come on, let's just go," he said impatiently. "My tablet says you're going to a residence. Are you sure you're..." Just as I was going to confront the guy in my back seat, I was interrupted by a young man getting into the front seat of the cab, who had an air about him that seemed to match the friendly demeanor of the man with whom I had just gotten off the phone. He was small and thin and had longish, wavy brown hair. "Hey, sorry it took me a minute. I had to close out my tab," said the man who had just sat down next to me. Are you, what does the order say, Josh? Because the guy in the back seat says he's the one who ordered this cab. Yeah, that's my name. I'm definitely the one who ordered your cab. I don't know who this guy is, said the nice man in my front seat. Okay, fine, you got me. I'm not the one who ordered the cab, but I'm just going a few blocks. Can't you take me to Carey Street Cafe on the way to this dude's house? Pleaded the toxic-smelling stranger in the back seat. No, you didn't order this cab. You're going to have to get out. And honestly, I'm pretty annoyed that you tried to trick me into ditching the guy who actually ordered my services. We don't double up on cab fares unless people know each other and they agree to it ahead of time. Carey Street Cafe isn't even on the way to this guy's house, I said bluntly. Come on, man, he whined to me, then turned his attention to my new acquaintance in the front seat and tried to bargain. Hey, dude, do you mind if we swing by Carey Street real quick before you go home? I'll pay you for the fare up to that point. Well, it's not really on the way, said Josh meekly. No, dude, that's not how this works. You need to get out of my cab. You didn't order my services, and you're inconveniencing the man who did. Please get out, I said firmly. And we're blocking traffic. I really gotta get this show on the road, so please, get out. Fuck you, I'm not leaving. Take me to Carey Street, he demanded as I silently mouthed an apology to Josh. Get out, I barked angrily. No, rebutted the idiot in the cheap seats. Dude, if you don't get out of my cab, I'm going to have to call the cops, and they will drag you out, I replied as I reached for my phone. Man, why do you have to be such a dick? Just take me to Carey Street Cafe, said the douche like a spoiled 5-year-old. I dialed 911. I'm calling 911 right now. You can still just get out. Bullshit, you're not calling 911 over this, he chided as he sat back and folded his arms in defiance. 911, what is your emergency? Asked the 911 dispatcher. Hi, yeah, I'm a taxi driver, and I have a man here who didn't order my services, and he's refusing to get out of my cab. I was wondering if you could send someone over so they can try to get him out, I said as I sat with my torso twisted towards the back seat so I could make uncomfortable eye contact with the dude. Sure thing. First, where are you? What does the man look like? Asked the dispatcher. I'm sitting outside a Metro Grill on Robinson, between Stewart and Hanover. I'm going to pull into the alley so I'm not blocking traffic anymore, I said as I pulled the car off the street. I turned on the dome light and looked back again at the dullard who wouldn't leave so I could get a better look at him. He's white, probably 6 feet tall. He's got dark brown hair with gel in it. Nothing too distinguishing about him. Looks like a guy who used to be in a frat. Without warning, I suddenly felt a closed fist slam against my jaw with all the force of an 11-year-old boy. He sucker punched me square in the jaw and jumped out of the cab before I could finish passively insulting him. Well, shit. He just punched me in the face and ran off. I don't know if you guys would be able to find him based on the description I gave you. I guess... just never mind. Sorry to waste your time, I said to the dispatcher despondently. Well, we can still look for him if you want. Nah, I don't want to waste any more of y'all's time. He's gone. Honestly, I wouldn't be able to pick him out of a lineup. He was just a generic douchebag, you know? And he punches like a little kid anyway, I told the sympathetic dispatcher. Okay, sir, well, sorry we couldn't be of more help to you, she said conciliatorily. She then requested some personal information for their records and ended the call. Sir, I'm so sorry you had to be part of that. Are you good? We can go now if you still want me to drive you, I said to Josh. Yeah, man, it's okay. Are you okay? It looked like he got you pretty good, asked Josh. Yeah, I'm fine. I've had worse. Let's just get you home, I assured him, and at that, I drove him home without further incident. Now, in this encounter, there was no mention of Uber, but seeing as how this happened so close to the last incident in time and location, it struck me as suspicious. These anecdotes are just two examples of many interactions that turned my suspicions to paranoia. I didn't start taking Adderall again until the spring of 2015, so I started noticing strange occurrences as a pattern long before I was taking speed. I already had a knack for making connections where there may not have been any, but Adderall seemed to amplify this tendency, and it led me to begin having trouble deciphering fact from fiction. There were so many instances of people being difficult with me, and then asking me why I wouldn't just quit and drive for Uber. It happened several times a day, practically every day that I worked. And then some days, I wouldn't experience anything that raised any red flags, which raised red flags in and of itself. I would think, how could I have so many incidents one day and then none the next? There were some times where friendly people would try to sell me on driving for Uber as well. These people didn't bother me so much because they at least treated me like a human being, and they usually tipped me pretty well as if to console me for the shit position I was in. My paranoia grew slowly but steadily, and wasn't strictly focused on whether or not Uber was making my life a living hell. Sometimes I had customers that made me think that the footage from my dash cam was being used for a web series, or a reboot of HBO's Taxicab Confessions. Sometimes I thought people were following my cab and recording me from the outside as I drove from place to place. I actually had a lot of customers treat my cab as a sort of confession booth, sometimes even making a point of looking into the camera as they told their stories. A lot of the drivers for Napoleon Taxi were young and popular guys within the Richmond music scene. We had some attractive young women who drove as well. We had several drivers who were in bands, some of whom were actually pretty famous. Ryan Waste, the guitarist for Municipal Waste, was a driver. Herbie, Valiant himself Abernathy, the singer for Valiant Thor, was a driver. Andy Horn, the singer for Battlemaster, was a driver. A guy I knew only as Weber, who played in a band called Cremains, was a driver. Judah Kennedy and Matt Christensen from a band called T-Division were drivers. I, Brian Sims, a guitar player in a D-beat crust band called 45 AD, was a driver. There were some others too, but I can't remember the names of the other guys' bands. Sorry if you're reading this. So between the cute girls we had as drivers, along with all these guys who were well known throughout the city, I thought that maybe someone was taking footage from our taxicab adventures and piecing together some kind of show or movie. Honestly, I think that if someone had done that, it would have been really entertaining, but I think that getting every passenger to sign a release after the fact would have been beyond difficult. Chapter 3. The Crying Corrections Officer. One night in the springtime, I got an order to pick someone up at a bar in Short Pump. This kind of trip can be risky because if you're downtown and that happens, like I was, there's a good chance that the customer won't be there by the time you drive out there, as the trek can take upwards of 20 minutes. Short Pump is a relatively new area that lies to the west of Richmond, where a lot of upper and upper middle class people live and hang out. I called the number on the order to confirm with the customer the location of the pickup and to ask him to please be patient while I made my way to him. It was around 2:30 a.m., which meant that the bars were all closed and the guy would have to wait outside until I got there. The probability that another cab would scoop him up before I got there was pretty good, but the payoff for the job had a lot of potential, so I took the gamble and raced out there as quickly as I could without running the risk of getting pulled over. On this night, I was driving a Toyota Prius, so driving out to Short Pump for a no-show wouldn't waste much in ways of gas money. The drop-off was to be somewhere in Southside, but no address was given on the order. Southside and Short Pump are not close, so if I was successful with the pickup, it was bound to pay off. I arrived at the bar around 15 minutes after I called the customer to confirm, and when I arrived, there was a young guy, probably 22 years old, sitting on a bench alone in front of a bar called Halligan's. He looked like he had just lost his best friend. His clothes looked stretched and disheveled, as though he had possibly been in a fight. I called the customer again, but the call went straight to voicemail. I rolled down my window and asked the guy if he had ordered a cab. He got up, staggered over to me, his head hanging low, with a defeated look on his face, and he got in the back seat without saying anything. My phone died. Man, tonight was bullshit. Do you have a charger I can use? Asked the young man as he fumbled with his seatbelt. I have a micro USB charger, so as long as you don't have an iPhone, I have a charger. Also, are you going to Southside? I've got a Samsung, he replied as he handed me his phone. I'm going to Bon Air. You know where that is? Yeah, what street do you live on? Is there a particular way you'd like to go? He told me his street name so I could put it in my GPS, and then said he didn't care which way I went. Alright, it looks like it's going to be about 20 minutes to get there. Do you want to listen to any music? I asked. Nah, I don't care. Play whatever. If you don't mind, I'm just going to sit back here and be quiet. Right on, man, I said cheerily. I put on some Washed Out and played it quietly because it was mellow and served as good background music. About 10 minutes into the ride, I started to hear my passenger sniffling and whimpering. I looked back, and he had his head against the window. He was crying. Hey man, are you okay? Is there something you want to talk about? I asked consolingly. It's just that my life fucking sucks, man. I know it sounds cliche, but I hate my job. It's really just the worst job there is, he sobbed. Oh, so you're a crack whore's assistant? I tried lightening the mood by referencing something Norm MacDonald said on Weekend Update in the 90s about the worst job in America. My passenger didn't seem to get the reference and made no reaction. No, but seriously, what do you do? What's so bad about it? I'm a fucking corrections officer, man. A prison guard. Every day, the inmates treat me like I'm the biggest piece of shit. I feel bad for them and I hate them at the same time. They're grown men who are trapped in cages, and they're all so fucking mean. He choked as he cried, and as his crying intensified. Oh shit, sorry man, that's rough. I couldn't do that job, I sympathized. They call me a faggot, and they threaten to kill me pretty much every day. And I'm not a bad guy. I don't want to be the one punishing these guys. I don't want to be the one to give them orders. Most of the guys in there are older and bigger than me. Oh man, seriously? I'm sorry, dude, that really sucks. Can't you do anything else? Can't you quit? I can't afford to quit right now. I don't have any skills, and I've got bills to pay. My girlfriend's pregnant, and I need to be able to support her and the baby. We're getting married soon, and she doesn't know that I'm so miserable. Hey man, I can't imagine what that must be like, but it sounds terrible. But you're young and still have plenty of opportunities to make something of yourself. I know it sounds trite, but you've got your whole life ahead of you. Also, you've got a kid on the way. That's exciting, right? Oh, by the way, we're getting kind of close to your neighborhood, so I might need your help navigating to your house. I tried changing the subject. On that note, he sat straight up, tried to force himself to stop crying. You're going to take a right up here at the light, then take your first right. Careful, there are speed humps. You're right, though. I'm lucky to have my girlfriend, and I'm excited to be a dad. I'm just scared, and I'm so drained from my job. I think I'm going to start looking for something else to do for a living. He trailed off for a moment and sniffled. Thanks for listening to me. I just needed a vent. Yeah, man, just hang in there. It'll get better. Just get out of that prison. You don't seem like the kind of guy who should be a corrections officer. I reassured him, even though I had no idea whether things would get better. I just thought it was the right thing to say. Say, do you have a driver's license? You could drive a cab. Although, I can't promise that it would make you any happier. There are some awful people who ride in cabs, and you have to work 10 to 12-hour shifts to make it worth your while. I followed up. I can drive, but I need to work somewhere where I get benefits. Do you have any benefits as a driver? Nah. Maybe cab driving isn't for you then. No benefits, sorry to say, I conceded. Yeah, probably not. I'm right up here on the right. We pulled up outside of his house, and he paid me with his credit card. Thanks again, man. I really appreciate you listening to me, he said as he got out of the car. Don't mention it. I stay positive. Good luck with everything, I said as I bid him goodnight. I wrote down the trip information on my manifest and got ready to pull away when I realized that my passenger had left his phone plugged into my charger. I looked around, but he was gone, and I didn't see which house he had gone into. I sat there in the parking lot of his housing development, conflicted over whether I should wait around for him or his girlfriend to call the phone, or if I should drop it in the lost and found when I got done with my shift. I decided to wait a few minutes, and luckily his girlfriend called the phone. I answered it and got their house number so I could bring it to them. I wished them good luck and good night, and then drove away. This fare wasn't really so suspicious to me, but I thought that maybe it had been planned in advance, that maybe the guy was an actor, and that the whole trip was really just a reality television sketch in the making. This was just one of many experiences to add to the case I was building in my head. Uber went live in Richmond in August of 2014. I'd say that I started having suspicious encounters as early as March of the same year. I'm not 100% sure of when each of these trips I've described took place, but I do know that things really started getting weird in the winter of 2014/2015, through the spring and summer. What sucks is, I've never been able to prove that the weirdness wasn't all in my head, and I likely never will. Okay, so those were chapters 2 and 3, and I really appreciate you sticking around to the end. If you enjoyed yourself, then please smash that like button, as it really helps get my videos exposure so more people will click on it. Again, thank you for sticking around, and tune in next week for chapters 4 and 5. Alright, thank you. Good night.